The Mosin Nagant is a 5-shot, bolt-action, internal magazine-fed, military rifle, developed by the Imperial Russian Army from 1882 to 1891, and used by the armed forces of the Russian Empire, the Soviet Union and various other nations. It is one of the most mass-produced military bolt-action rifles in history, with over 37 million units made since its conception in 1891. And in spite of its age, it has shown up in various conflicts around the world, even up to the modern day, being plentiful, cheap, rugged, simple to use, and effective, much like the AK-47 and its variants. History. Initial design and tests. During the Russo-Ottoman War of 1877 to 1878, Russian troops armed mostly with Burden single-shot rifles suffered heavy casualties against Turkish troops equipped with Winchester repeating rifles, particularly at the bloody siege of Pleven. This showed Russian commanders the need to modernize the Imperial Army. In 1889, 3 rifles were submitted for evaluation. Captain Sergei Ivanovich Mosin of the Imperial Army submitted his 3-line caliber rifle. Belgian designer Elia Couteau and Nagant submitted a 3.5-line design, and a Captain Zinoviev submitted another 3-line design. When trials concluded in 1891, the evaluators were split in their assessment. The main disadvantages of Nagant's rifle were a more complicated mechanism and a long and tiresome procedure of disassembling. Mosin's rifle was mainly criticized for its lower quality of manufacture and materials, resulting in a slightly larger number of stoppages. The Commission voted 14-10 to approve Nagant's rifle. However, the head of the Commission, General Chagin, ordered subsequent tests held under the Commission's supervision, during which Mosin's rifle showed its advantages, leading to its selection over the Nagant. Technical detail. Compared to the 1898 Mauser rifle, the 1891 Mosin has a commonality in that it uses 2 front-locking lugs to lock up the action. However, the Mosin's lugs lock in the horizontal position, whereas the Mauser locks vertically. The Mosin bolt body is multi-piece, whereas the Mauser is one-piece. The Mosin uses interchangeable bolt heads like the Lee Enfield, unlike the Mauser, which uses a controlled feed bolt head in which the cartridge base snaps up under the fixed extractor as the cartridge is fed from the magazine. The Mosin has a push-feed recessed bolt head in which the spring-loaded extractor snaps over the cartridge base as the bolt is finally closed, similar to the GU-88 and M91 Carcano are modern sporting rifles like the Remington 700. Like the Mauser, the Mosin uses a blade ejector mounted in the receiver. The Mosin bolt is removed by simply pulling it fully to the rear of the receiver and squeezing the trigger, while the Mauser has a bolt stop lever separate from the trigger. Like the Mauser, the bolt lift arc on the Mosin Nagant is 90 degrees versus 60 degrees on the Lee Enfield. The Mauser bolt handle is at the rear of the bolt body and locks behind the solid rear receiver ring. The Mosin bolt handle is similar to the Mannlicher. It is attached to a protrusion on the middle of the bolt body, which serves as a bolt guide, and it locks protruding out of the ejection loading port in front of a split rear receiver ring, also serving a similar function to Mauser's third, or safety, lug. The rifling of the Mosin barrel is right-turning 4-groove with a twist of 1 to 9.5 or 110. The 5-round fixed metallic magazine can either be loaded by inserting the cartridges singly, or more often in military service, by the use of 5-round stripper clips. Refinement and production. The 3-line rifle, model 1891, its original official designation, was adopted by the Russian military in 1891. There have been several variations from the original rifle, the most common being the M1891-30, which was a modernized design introduced in 1930. Some details were borrowed from Nagant's design. One such detail is the attachment of the magazine spring to the magazine base plate. In Mosin's original design, the spring was not attached to the base plate and, according to the Commission, could be lost during cleaning. Another detail is the form of the clip that could hold 5 cartridges to be loaded simultaneously into the magazine. Another detail is the form of the interrupter, a specially designed part within the receiver, which helps prevent double feeding. The initial rifle proposed by Mosin lacked an interrupter, leading to numerous failures to feed. This detail was introduced in the rifle borrowing from Nagant's rifle, although the form of the interrupter was slightly changed. This alteration was subsequently borrowed back by the Commission for the Model 1891 Mosin Nagant. During the modernization of 1930, the form of the interrupter was further changed from a single-piece to a two-piece design, as the part had turned out to be one of the least reliable parts of the action. Only the clip loading cartridges and the attachment of the magazine spring to the magazine base plate in subsequent models were designed by Nagant. Considering the rifle could be easily loaded without using a clip, one cartridge after another, the magazine spring attached to the magazine base plate is the only contribution of Nagant to all rifles after 1930. Nagant's legal dispute. Despite the failure of Nagant's rifle, he filed a patent suit, claiming he was entitled to the sum the winner was to receive. It appeared that Nagant was the first to apply for the international patent protection over the interrupter, although he borrowed it from Mosin's design initially. Mosin could not apply for a patent since he was an officer of the Russian Army, and the design of the rifle was owned by the government and had the status of a military secret. A scandal was about to burst out, with Nagant threatening he would not participate in trials held in Russia ever again and some officials proposing to expel Nagant from any further trials as he borrowed the design of the interrupter after it was covered by the secrecy status given in Russia at that time to military inventions and therefore violated Russian law. Taking into consideration that Nagant was one of the few producers not engaged by competitive governments and generally eager to cooperate and share experience and technologies, the Commission paid him a sum of 200,000 Russian rubles, equal to the premium that Mosin received as the winner. The rifle did not receive the name of Mosin in order not to provoke further debates with Nagant. This turned out to be a wise decision, as in 1895, Nagant's revolver was adopted by the Russian Army as the main sidearm. However, for the same reason and because of Nagant's attempts to use the situation for publicity, the Mosin Nagant name appeared in the Western literature. The name is a misnomer from the legal point of view and from technical point of view, as none of the details borrowed from Nagant's design, even if removed, would prevent the rifle from firing. Moreover, from the technical point of view, the rifle that came to be called Mosin Nagant is the design proposed by Mosin, as further amended by Mosin with some details being borrowed from Nagant's design. Production of the Model 1891 began in 1892 at the ordnance factories of Tula Arsenal, Ijevsk Arsenal and at Sestroresk Arsenal. An order for 500,000 rifles was placed with the French arms factory, Manufacture Nationale d'Armes de Châtellerault. Russo-Japanese War. In 1889, Tsar Nicholas ordered the Russian army to meet or exceed European standards in rifle developments with rifles of reduced caliber and cartridges with smokeless powder. The new weapons would entail high velocities, exceeding 600 meters per second, and would result in land battles both commencing and being capable of being fought at longer ranges, nearly 2 kilometers. The new Mosin rifles would replace the Burden rifles then in use by the Russian Army. The Russo-Japanese War would be the Mosin Nagant M1891 rifles' first major blooding, and by the time the war broke out in 1904, approximately 3,800,000 Mosin Nagant M1891 rifles had been built, with over 1.5 million in the hands of the Russian cavalry and all of his reserves when hostilities commenced. Though few M1891s saw combat in the conflict, most Russian units in the Far East were still issued Burden rifles. Between the adoption of the final design in 1891 and the year 1910, several variants and modifications to the existing rifles were made. World War I. With the start of World War I, production was restricted to the M1891 Dragoon and infantry models for the sake of simplicity, due to the desperate shortage of arms and the shortcomings of a still developing domestic industry. The Russian government ordered 1.5 million M1891 infantry rifles from Remington Arms and another 1.8 million from New England Westinghouse Company. In the United States in 1915, Remington produced 750,000 rifles before production was halted by the 1917 October Revolution. Deliveries to Russia had amounted to 469,951 rifles when the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk ended hostilities between the Central Powers and Russia. Henceforth, the new Bolshevik regime of Vladimir Lenin cancelled payments to the American companies manufacturing the Mosin Nagant, with Remington and Westinghouse on the precipices of bankruptcy from the Communists' decision. The remaining 280,000 rifles were purchased by the United States Army. American and British expeditionary forces of the North Russia campaign were armed with these rifles and sent to Murmansk and Arkhangelsk in the late summer of 1918 to prevent the large quantities of munitions delivered for Tsarist forces from being captured by the Central Powers. Remaining rifles were used for the training of U.S. Army troops. Some were used to equip U.S. National Guard SATC and ROTC units. Designated U.S. Rifle 7.62 mm model of 1916. These are among the rarest of American service arms. In 1917, 50,000 rifles were sent via Vladivostok to the Czechoslovak legions in Siberia to aid in their attempt to secure passage to France. Many of the New England Westinghouse and Remington Mosin Nagants were sold to private citizens in the United States before World War II through the Office of the Director of Civilian Marksmanship, the predecessor to the federal government's current civilian marksmanship program. Large numbers of Mosin Nagants were captured by German and Austro-Hungarian forces and saw service with the rear echelon forces of both armies, and also with the Imperial German Navy. Many of these weapons were sold to Finland in the 1920s. Civil War, modernization, and wars with Finland. During the Russian Civil War, infantry and dragoon versions were still in production, though in dramatically reduced numbers. The rifle was widely used by Bolsheviks, blackguards, and their enemies, the White Russians. In 1924, following the victory of the Red Army, a committee was established to modernize the rifle, which had by then been in service for over 3 decades. This effort led to the development of the Model 91/30th rifle, which was based on the design of the original Dragoon version. The barrel length was shortened by 9 centimeters. The sight measurements were converted from arshins to meters, and the front sight blade was replaced by a hooded post front sight less susceptible to being knocked out of alignment. There were also minor modifications to the bolt but not enough to prevent interchangeability with the earlier Model 1891 and the so-called Cossack Dragoon rifles. Finland was a Grand Duchy in the Russian Empire until 1917, so Finns had long used the Mosin Nagant in service with the Tsarist military. The rifle was used in the short civil war there and adopted as the service rifle of the new Republic's army. Finland produced several variants of the Mosin Nagant, all of them manufactured using the receivers of Russian-made or Soviet-made rifles. Finland also utilized a number of captured M91 and M91-30 rifles with minimal modifications. As a result, the rifle was used on both sides of the Winter War and the Continuation War during World War II. Finnish Mosin Nagants were produced by Sarko, Tikikoski, and VKT, with some using barrels imported from Switzerland and Germany. In assembling M39 rifles, Finnish armourers reused octagonal receivers that dated back as far as 1894. Finnish rifles are characterized by Russian, French or American-made receivers stamped with a brokhous, as well as many other parts produced in those countries and barrels produced in Finland, Switzerland, Austria, Belgium and Germany. The Finns also manufactured three-piece, finger-splice stocks for the Mosin Nagant rifles. In addition, the rifle was distributed as aid to Republican anti-Franco forces in the Spanish Civil War. Spanish Civil War Mosins can be readily identified by the wire sling hangers inserted in the slots in the forearm and buttstock meant to take the Russian dog collars for Russian-style slings, so the rifles could accept Western European-style rifle slings. World War II. At the beginning of the war, the Mosin Nagant 91/30 was the standard-issue weapon of Soviet troops, and millions of the rifles were produced and used in World War II by the largest mobilized army in history. The Mosin Nagant Model 1891/30 was modified and adapted as a sniper rifle from 1932 onwards, with mounts and scopes from Germany at first and subsequently with domestic designs, and from 1942 was issued with 3.5-POWER fixed focus scopes to Soviet snipers. It served quite prominently in the brutal urban battles on the Eastern Front, such as the Battle of Stalingrad, which made heroes of snipers like Vasily Zaziev and Ivan Sidorenko. These sniper rifles were highly respected for being very rugged, reliable, accurate, and easy to maintain. Finland also employed the Mosin Nagant as a sniper rifle, with similar success with their own designs and captured Soviet rifles. For example, Simo Häyhä is credited with killing 505 Soviet soldiers, many falling victim to his Finnish M28-30 Mosin Nagant rifle. Häyhä did not use a scope on his Mosin. In interviews Häyhä gave before his death, he said that the scope and mount designed by the Soviets required the shooter to expose himself too much and raise his head too high, increasing the chances of being spotted by the enemy. In 1935-1936, the 91/30 was again modified, this time to lower production time. The hex receiver was changed to a round receiver. When war with Germany broke out, the need to produce Mosin Nagants in vast quantities led to a further simplification of machining and a falling off in finish of the rifles. The wartime Mosins are easily identified by the presence of tool marks and rough finishing that never would have passed the inspectors in peacetime. However, despite a lack of both aesthetic focus and uniformity quality, the basic functionality of the Mosins was unimpaired. In addition, in 1938, a carbine version of the Mosin Nagant, the M38, was issued. The carbine used the same cartridge and action as other Mosins, but the barrel was shortened by 22 centimeters to bring the weapon down to an overall length of 100 centimeters, with the forearm shortened in proportion. The idea was to issue the M38 to troops such as combat engineers, signal corps, and artillerymen, who could conceivably need to defend themselves from sudden enemy advances but whose primary duties lay behind the front lines. Significantly, the front sight of the M38 was positioned in such a way that the Model 9130's cruciform bayonet could not be mounted to the muzzle even if a soldier obtained one. An increase in urban combat led directly to the development of the Model M44 Mosin. In essence, the M44 is an M38 with a slightly modified forearm and with a permanently mounted cruciform bayonet that folds to the right when it is not needed. In terms of handiness, the M44 was an improvement on the Model 9130, particularly for urban warfare, but few M44s saw combat on the Eastern Front. By the end of the war, approximately 17.4 million M9130 rifles had been produced. Increased worldwide use. In the years after World War II, the Soviet Union ceased production of all Mosin Nagants and withdrew them from service in favor of the SKS series carbines and eventually the AK series rifles. Despite its increasing obsolescence, the Mosin Nagant saw continued service throughout the Eastern Bloc and the rest of the world for many decades to come. Mosin Nagant rifles and carbines saw service on many fronts of the Cold War, from Korea and Vietnam to Afghanistan and along the Iron Curtain in Europe. They were kept not only as reserve stockpiles, but frontline infantry weapons as well. Virtually every country that received military aid from the Soviet Union, China, and Eastern Europe during the Cold War used Mosin Nagants at various times. Middle Eastern countries within the sphere of Soviet influence, Egypt, Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan and Palestinian fighters, have received them in addition to other more modern arms. Mosin Nagants have also seen action in the hands of both Soviet and Mujahideen forces in Afghanistan during the Soviet Union's occupation of the country during the 1970s and the 1980s. The use in Afghanistan continued on well into the 1990s and the early 21st century by Northern Alliance forces. Even after the collapse of the Soviet Union, Mosin Nagants are still commonly found on modern battlefields around the world. They were used by insurgent forces in the Iraq War and the war in Afghanistan. Mosin Nagant rifles have even been seen in the present conflict of the Syrian civil war in the hands of rebels. Separatists have also used the rifles alongside more modern Russian firearms in the Second War in Chechnya. In addition, scoped Mosins continue to serve as issue sniper rifles with the Afghan Army, the Iraqi Army, the Finnish Army, and with a micrometer sight as a sniper training and precision target rifle with the Finns. Mosin Nagants have been used by both pro-Russian separatists and pro-Ukrainian forces in the ongoing conflict in eastern Ukraine. Considering sniper rifles as part of a national army's weapons, the Mosin Nagant is the longest continuously serving rifle in history, at more than 120 years. However, the Mosin Nagant is not the longest continuously serving firearm used in combat issued by a government, as the Brown Bess musket was in use from 1720 through about 1865 within the British Empire.